Hi, everybody. How are you doing?
Hey,
Hi, Chris. How are you?
good, good. How about yourself?
Good. You ready for tomorrow?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
so you
I'm
have
actually.
exam tomorrow, Chris?
Oh, Chris has
No.
an interview tomorrow.
Oh, what
Yeah,
job? Where?
he applied for the Cascade internship a while back, and we found a match for him and a few other students. So they're gonna go through the interview tomorrow. So
How many? So all three of us will have a spot, or is it between one of the three?
that's what he was planning, but the employer is really trying to determine if you like him and he like you. And he's gonna talk a little bit about what he does and see, because he said that if I wanted to devote time to help the students learn in the process, I want to make sure they enjoy it. So and I
Okay.
sent you the link about the company. So
Yeah, I saw it.
Say
The
again,
farming.
what
That.
interview? Where? Cal State?
so no, with an employer that I have a grant called Cascade Catalyst grant with the Department of Defense. I posted in the chat last week for the application, and this grant goes until next year. So and we have employers that work with Department of Defense that wants to hire interns in different area like programming and stuff. So if you're interested, you can apply. And then I think I also, let me see if I can find it again. But they're also looking for like business students too. So I'll drop it in the chat before we end. So if you like to apply, you can. The process is that we have to run background and then go through. So sometimes it's a quick match, sometimes it's not. It all depends on how companies are responding. But lately they've been picking up. So when we started was COVID-19 the beginning, and so it drastically slowed us down. But right now we have quite a few companies responding. So
How would it affect the apprenticeship though? I had a with.
apprenticeship doesn't officially start until spring.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah, they
I'm
wanted to
glad that.
start it. Yeah, so it's two different things. So you can do both, or if you do apprenticeship and that concurrently at the same time, we'll try to coordinate it. Internship is designed to work with your hours and you work remotely, so you work from home. And some companies are more farther along with the compliance than other. So yeah. And you can only do 20 hours max per week, and you can have up to 80 hours or 75 to 80 hours total. So it's a short paid internship. Okay. And if they like you, then they might offer you a job. And, if not, then you and them can move on. It all depends, because sometimes students don't like it after they're done.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I just finished with two. And the companies, there's some of them are very small, so they don't even have the budget to bring on people, but they wanted to keep the student gaining the skills. So some students, they just volunteer after that, some students get hired. So it all depends on the company.
Okay, that's cool.
Okay. All right. So if you have any questions about that, you can shoot me an email. I've been answering some business student questions all day because I try to recruit on the business side too, because they need help in that area too, besides technical. All right, so let's talk about what we have in plan today and the rest of the week. I don't plan to hold a lecture session on Wednesday. So if you, the whole point is to go through the lecture today, allow you to take some time and work with creating graphical user interface if you like. I want you to leave this class knowing how to do it, and you can implement it into your project if you wish. And in addition, you know, on Wednesday, this is not due for your lab today. It's not going to be due until Friday. So you have the rest of the week to work on it. So no rush. So I'm going to go through and explain each part, a little bit of the notes, and then, you know, and the exercises that we're going to be doing for the lab. From here on out, I'm going to only meet on Monday, just to kind of catch up with you, how you're doing with your project. And then some of the weeks, starting with 13 and 14, we are going to do some final review, going over some of the topics we talked about. And then, you know, so the lab time that we are normally dedicated to on Wednesday, I'm going to give you that time to work on your project. Now, if you need help with, you know, team coordination and some of that, and if you want to meet on Wednesday, I'm open to it. So let me know, then we can still get on Zoom and coordinate some of that. Next week, I'm going to share with you some team resources, some application you can use, how you can use them, stuff like that. And then the following week, we'll move into final review. And so you're getting very close to the end now. Okay. So think about what you need to do for your project, plan accordingly. Do not wait till the last minute, because you can find issues. And even if you find issues at the last minute, and I can try to help, but sometimes it doesn't get resolved and it gets incompleted. So, okay. All right. So let's get into screen share real quick. And let me get back into the other class. My least favorite day, even though I love teaching this class and all my classes, is Monday, because there's so many things to get started in the week administratively. So, all right. That aside, we're going to talk about graphical user interface today, which is unit 11. I post the notes and I post the lab for you to do. And you're going to find that if you've written in JavaScript and Java and C++, it's very similar to it. So it's event driven. So we'll first start with using the toolkits and what kind of toolkits will be suitable. So you will find that with the unit 11 notes, that will be. So I was torn between what kind of toolkits should I present to you, and I have decided to use Tkinter. So Tkinter basically give you the basic foundation. So if you can understand it, it's easier to work with the other. While I added some link to tutorials for the other kits. And some of the other kits are very much like the Visual Basic, where you can drag and drop, but you still have to tie everything together. So you have to understand, you know, what is an event, how that will be tied to certain widgets. So if you understand Tkinter, you will be able to understand the other ones. Now, Qt or Qt, they decided that they don't allow free licenses for proprietary development anymore. So if you decided to work with Qt, they also have their own IDE and, you know, packages and stuff that you can implement. So you can use Qt or Qt to bind and package some of your product. But if you decided to sell your app or make some monetary gain out of it, you're going to end up having to pay for the license. And same thing with Java, right? Some of the Java packages. So at the beginning, it talks about Tkinter. We're going to spend a lot of time working with this kit. And when you read the documentation, some part of it is, you know, it can be challenging because they have like 2-3 locations where you would go. So you would start with looking at the Python documentation itself for the 3.9.x version, and you will find some details in that. Then you would also go to the TK homepage to look at their documentation, and that will give you more details on how to work with some of the sub area of it. So I think that looking at the Python documentation, like this link here, would give you adequate understanding for the basic, okay? Now, there are tons of resources online for it. There's a lot of tutorial for it. So it's commonly used, and it's portable with Mac OS X, Windows, Unix platform. Now, once you created your program, which is .py, right, and you have these interfaces because you're using this module, after you're done, when we release it, let's say that you release it for free use or whatever, right? If you wanted to make money and sell this to a company, what happened is you have to package it into something that would be executable. And in that, right, then you would go to their homepage and look at how you can package it into an executable application, meaning that somebody can run the setup, install, and run that application, okay? Because we don't release we release source code as, you know, its raw form. However, when we package it for user to be able to install and work with it, then we want to package it as an executable. And again, there is tutorial and resources on that. I've combed through the web throughout last week, and I found a lot of the details very easy to use. Okay, so that one we're going to be using. The second one is Qt or Qt. They have been providing this resources for C++, Python, Java, and you know, so you do have access to Qt. Now, keep in mind that when you download their packages, it's very large, okay? And it won't push through command line. So most of the other stuff you can do like pip install on Windows, or you can do sudo apt-get install in Linux and you know, Mac OS based terminal. However, you cannot do that with some of these larger packages because they require that you would register for an account so they can track licenses and making sure that you're using the license for the right reasons. So you cannot automatically pull the install from command line. Now, a little bit more about this one. It's supportive of the PyKDE4. So, and if you are familiar with Linux, you know that there's development from the KDE side, so it works with that. Also, you have to buy the license if you want to write proprietary license. Like I said, if you sell your application, then you have to buy the license, because if you don't, right, and they're gonna come back and they're gonna fine you. Okay, so it's important that we're aware of the license limitation when we choose these type of products, especially when you're trying to write it for cross-platform, you're trying to implement some of the features in your GUI. Qt is very good with 3D. So when you work with game development, especially with Python, then what you can see is that you can bring in the packages, right? And when you download the library for 2D and 3D on Qt, very large on both sides, C++ and the other languages. So I found some really great stuff. I linked a couple of the videos on here. This is the one with the 5 version, and I think they're at 5.x for the binding packages for Python. So you can check those out if you're interested in using that. Okay. And then there are a few more, but I included some of these because they're popular. I've mentioned before that there's Kivy. Kivy with the 3.9 Python version is not fully compatible. I had tried to roll back the version to earlier, like 3.7, 3.8. there's some flaws with this particular toolkit. However, it can be used for cross-platform. So if you're writing application for Windows, Mac OS, and Linux, mobile devices, Android, iOS, then you would consider Kiwi. And they have their own documentation, and it will tell you what to do. Along with there's some tutorials on it, not as wide as some of the other ones. But this is to the MIT license, so this is free and open source software. However, MIT does have limitations, so when you use it for non-educational purposes, or when you make it into proprietary, you have to read the license agreement. Likely that you will have to contact them and ask for permission to do that or pay them. Okay, so Kiwi is another option. So out of these three, I have decided to show you how to use Tkinter. Okay, so now when you're working with Toolkit, like you have to download it, whether you visit the website and click download and fill out the form to download. And often we would use our command line to be able to install, right? In Windows, you would use pip install. So now let's say that I wanted to install Tkinter, right? When you do pip install Tkinter like this, okay, what will happen is if you haven't installed it before, right, then it's gonna say, oh, well, you know, it's the older versions, newer versions, none, etc. So here you see, could not find a version that satisfied the requirement, no matching distribution found. I had done this last night. Now, when you have an older pip, so what pip does is it's gonna go look for distribution of this, and it's gonna try to download and install for you at the same time, very much like sudo apt-get in Linux and Mac OS. So what I did for you here is I put down the command. So once you issue that with the proper toolkit name, you would press enter, right? And if your pip is outdated, it will give you the message. So you have to do like Python, you know, update, and then the pip version, etc. Okay, so just follow the message instruction and you should be able to install updated version of pip. You can install the toolkit. Then if you have Mac OS and if you're using that, right, like if you're using your MacBook or your iMac, I suggest that you would look here. Also Linux. Okay, let me copy this and open it so you can see. So here it gives you the instructions on how to go through and look at the versions. Okay. So like in Ubuntu, you would do this. Okay. There's specific commands that you would use. So you have to first get it, do an update, and then you would, you would install the TK. Now for the homebrew, which is on Mac OS, okay, this is bundle, and so make sure that you read this section, and then you would click on how to obtain homebrew first and be able to use homebrew to pull the package. Okay. All right, so that's the link for you to look at different Linux flavors and also your Mac OS. Any question? Okay. So as we choose our toolkit, we want to make sure that it would be compatible with your system as well, right? So in this example, what I wanted to show you is that we're going to use Tkinter. And Tkinter, it's best, they said, to also look at the man pages. And that's described for the C interface, you know, that Python in the back, it's C. So what you would have is you would be able to have helpful information. And then there's some references with books and documents and tons of stuff that you can use to reference. So when you start designing your graphical user interface, we're only going to go through some of the basics. However, right, down the line, you might want to implement something more more advanced. Then you want to use these references to be able to expand your skill. Okay, like something like drag and drop, you know, compared to what we see with color and common dialog boxes. That's what we're going to be working with. Okay,
Do you,
now,
sorry,
yes.
a question. Do you recommend writing first the program or write it with Tinker?
I would do it concurrently because now it both sides, right? So when if you have a design in mind of how you wanted your program to look, you would write it all at once. But if you wanted to just make it first work in console and then see how you can implement it in with graphical user interface, you can do that as well. Now, by that time, sometime you will have to make adjustment, right? Because in some area where you would normally call that function or that method, you would then have to adjust it. Because let's say that if you create a button to click it for something to happen, right? To calculate, let's say, a total score for poker game, then before we don't have to have any kind of event that ties to it, but now you have to have some kind of widget, right? That event needs to tie to the total point for your poker score. Okay, so if you do it all together and if you pseudocode it out, you kind of have an idea of how to approach it instead of dissecting it later and piece it out and be able to, you know, relocate it, and so that way it will work appropriately. Okay, so you might end up changing a big chunk of your code if you do it after the fact. And then if you do it all together, that can be tedious, but you can plan accordingly. That's my perspective. Okay. So now if you just want the program to work first and do that, and then go back and add in the GUI, sure. But keep in mind that you will need to make some adjustment. Okay, any questions? Okay, so here it gives you some resources. Okay, so in the first part, we saw that we had to install the package or the toolkit. Okay, and I re-referenced that again. And then when you start writing, we can simply just write it for just the graphical user interface at this point, right? Now, breaking this down, so it says here, it says that the application programmers almost always refer to the classes at the very bottom of the hierarchy. So when you're looking at this, you're looking at the bottom classes. These classes are provided for the purposes of organizing certain functions under one namespace. They aren't meant to be instantiated independently. Okay, TK class is meant to be instantiated only once in the application. So it's all going to be together. Keep in mind that's the case. The application programmer need not to instantiate it one explicitly, and the system creates only one whenever any of the other classes are instantiated. So the widget class is not meant to be instantiated. It's meant only to be subclassing to make it real widgets. Okay, so look at it as a one component, and you're going to tie that in. Okay, now itself, when you're looking at it, and this comes from the Python documentation, So I wanted to give this to you so you can see why did we learn about classes? Why is this important in the graphical user interface and what does it really mean, right? So at the top, okay, we learned about import in the past. So when you write your program at the top, you have to import in that toolkit, that module. Now here you can use an identifier here, which is TK, okay? You can call it anything you want. I can call it tools, I can call it, however, you can also put in like this, use an asterisk, okay? So with that, then we can later tie that to a name, a root. So in this case, we call it TK. So we have to use TK throughout our program, okay? All right, so we have constructor, and remember, right? So this is what we have as a class application. And here we started constructing some of the instance variable here. Okay, so, and that's going to tie with the object for that class. So here what you have is you're using super, right? We talked about super last week, and then you have self master. Now this pack is very important. After every widget you have to pack, otherwise it doesn't work, right? And we'll talk about pack shortly. Okay, so here we have the constructor. Then what this will do is in the next, here's our method. Okay, so this program basically is, when you run it, it has a button and it's going to have hello world when it's clicked. Okay, and that's the whole point. So when we write it, we have to say, okay, first we have to make a button, and then we have to have a function or a method that's going to do something when that button is clicked. Is it going to display text? Is it going to calculate? Is it going to do a task? Okay, so this is why the definition for that method is there. Create widgets. Okay, so, and this one. Okay, so here you have a button. Okay, so here we're going to bring that, we're going to have cell dot hi there, and this is a button, and this is instance because it's only going to be used in this area. Okay, then the show, what it's going to show is going to say hello world, and that's a click me. Okay, then it's going to call on the second one when it's clicked. Okay, so after you're done, you have to pack it so that way it can be used in the main, in the loop. So with that widget, when you create that widget, what that does is it's, the system is gonna try to listen for an event that's gonna occur, right? What is an event? An event could be a mouse click, hover over something, a press of a button on the keyboard, etc. So this is why at the end we have to have a loop that's going to listen in on every single event that occurs. So if we have a widget for a button, it's going to wait to hear or see that click. Okay. Now, here we have a self quit for the button, and it's going to say quit, and it's in red, so we can click, and then we can click quit. We can click hello world, and we can click quit. Okay. And then when we click hello world, it's going to say hi there everyone. It's going to show that as a little message. Okay. Now down here, this is where you see the object. Now sometimes you would see this at the top. A lot of the times by practice you would see this over at the top. But when we look at how we've been writing our classes, here's your object, right? Your object is called root, and it's an object of TK class. Okay. And then for your app is going to be application master root. And here is your loop. This is required. Okay. If you don't have this, it's not going to listen for the event. So if you have like 100 events, 100 things, right? Like filled out different text box, click different text box, drop down menu, an image on a button. If you don't have the loop, not going to work. Okay, because so far we've been doing everything in the console base. We need to bring it over and make it become an event-driven application. Okay, any question? So let me show you how this is. You can copy and paste that and run it yourself, of course. So here is my program. Just want to make sure I have everything right. Okay. And if I expand this so you can see, right, we have the button. That's one of the ones that we defined there. Create that button, click me, and then quit. So when I click this, what I can do is I can go back to my shell and see how it outputs here, right? Now, if you wanted to output it in that same window, you have to make another widget, and then you have to create a method to show that, to show whatever the other method is containing, okay, to output. Otherwise, it's gonna, the way it's written like this, it's only gonna show that into the shell here. Hi there, everyone. And so what I can do is I can, let me minimize this. I can keep clicking it and it's just gonna keep showing here. And then when I quit, right, it goes away. Okay, so we're gonna learn about how we're gonna destroy that widget, right? Because you don't want it lingering around. That way it confuses the user. So at the point where you click quit, as it goes through that, when it completes that, the command takes effect that it's gonna get rid of that quit button, right? And make it go away because you don't want it to be popping on the top still. Okay, so the master here is just like how we treat it previously using another variable. It's just a name that we call it, just like how you had in the last class. So when you construct this, right, you're saying that this is equal to master. It's just the way you name it. So the way that the master is used here, I think it's surface right here, it's gonna tie this button back to the constructor or that instance variable, so that way you can use it with how it's mapped out to that widget. Okay, but you can call it anything you want because you construct it with the name master, and that's an instance to that application class, to that class, just like before. Now you notice that they put in the tk.frame here, right? You have to construct that frame. So this is one way. I wanted to show you this is one way. And then I will show you different approach where you can add it as layer, as multiple pieces, multiple widgets, and then to be able to build it all together. Okay. So if you write it as a class, it would look something like this. Okay. So now this master is going to tie back to your object over here as it's pointed back to your class. And so what you're saying, root is an object of the TK, and root is the same as the master of the application, which is the same as the app. So instead of using root here to listen, you also use app, and app would be associated with root, which is your object of the TK class and the application class. So that's how we're able to correlate those two objects. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Okay, so yes.
Oh, we don't see the function main loop in this program, right?
No,
We don't see that. Okay.
yeah, so that is always going to be in the background. What its job is to hear or to look for every single event that you create. And in this case, we have button widget, 2 buttons, right? We have one that's going to be a click me, hello world, and the other one is to quit. So what it's going to do is it's going to wait for the click events, okay? And the click events is going to occur, then it's going to execute those click events.
So you can
Okay.
set it so that it listens to more than one event.
Oh yeah, if you have it as loop and if you tie that to a certain object, right? In this case, they tie it to an app, app, and that is tied to our original object, which is root. But you can just use root to start. You can listen, you know, it would just be trying to identify possible event that would occur that would relate to that object.
Is there a term for it like in JavaScript? This is called an event handler. Is there a term?
Yeah, it's like that, but they call it like an infinite event loop. I've tried to look through it, and that's what it's. There's no technical. It's usually this is a method, okay, and then you use that with your object, and it would just keep listening until the end. Other questions?
There's a question in
Okay.
chat.
Let's see. The super at the beginning. Okay, so when you're looking at the super, right? This super is saying that it's a subclass of the TK class. So because when you import this module in, it has classes as well. So basically you're saying that this class that you created here is a subclass of those. Okay. Yeah, so, and if you want to see their, you know, you can go to their site and it gives you the actual source code for that. But yeah, so when you work with these, you're working with the module, you actually have multiple classes in that module being used. Okay, and then within that, they have methods that were already written for specific things, for buttons, for etc. Okay. All right. So as you run this program, you can see a little bit more. And then the output of this, we show that in shell. Okay. The second example I wanted to show you is a login screen. And again, we are importing in Tkinter. And remember, we have to download, right, install, and then that way we can import. And here, like the other one, but this is at the top. So you have the object of the TK class. Okay. And in this one, this allows us to use that object that we just created, which is root. And you can call it TK, you can call it root. A lot of people use root, and other people, they would use TK. And then if you set the geometry very much like HTML, you can set the size, and JavaScript too, right? The other program languages, you would be able to set the size of your window. So here is where we would configure the window size. Then after that, what we have is we declare a variable name var and pass var. So this is going to be to store our username, and this is going to be to store our password. So we basically ask the user to enter their username and their password. Okay. And with this, we would use the string var from TK, then we write a method. So in this one, you define a function to obtain the name and the password from the user. Now in Python for Tkinter, it uses entry.get. Okay, think of it like getLine in C++, but in this one, we tie it to a widget, right? Which is gonna be that text box that they're gonna type in for each of these, the username and the password. So whatever you declare as a variable there, you're going to use it with the .get, and then for the password, you're going to use it with the .get. Now, some of the tutorial go into the extent where you don't, like let's say that you have the user type in a comment and you don't want the entire comment, right? Like lines, or you can size it down to specific word, then you can do slicing. Okay. You can slice it and it's all going to be characters in strings, so you can point to the position of the character in order to slice it. So after we have them enter and get the password and the username, we would print it. Okay. Then after we get, right, then we need to set. Okay. And here we want it to be empty string, so we can set whatever they type into that space. Now we cannot have text box without labels, because then it will just be like empty boxes. People won't know what that means, right? Even though you program that field for username and the second field for password, you still have to label it so the user can see, oh, the first box is for username, the second box is for password. So what we need is we need to create a widget that is a label. And you simply can name it name label, and then password label, etc. Right? And we would use TK label from the module. Here is our object, root, and the text that you want to display is username on that label. And then if you wanted to configure the font type, the size, and how it looks, this is where you put it. And you would put those in the parentheses for font. Okay. So all of this is the property of the label for the name, the username. Okay. Now, not only that we have to make the label, we have to add in an entry for the widget input. And Python Tkinter has entry implemented so that way it would read, right, as it gets. So we want it to be able to have the user enter so that way it understands that it needs to record that. So the name, use, and widget entry, and to create an entry for the input. Okay. So here you would have name entry declared as the TK entry. And again, we're going to use the object, right? And then it's the property for that entry point. Okay. So when you do this, you would have two things that are it's required: the label, right, and the entry, the box where they enter, the white or whatever color you want it, because otherwise we won't know, right? So a label is going to tell the user what that is. The entry is where we actually record what they type there, and we would use the get and set to be able to actually store that into a location of the memory. Then for the password section, again, we have a password label and then the field where they can enter their password. Okay. All right. So now after that, we wanted to have a submit button, because what's the point of typing it in and to see how I would have a confirmation if I type in my password and it went somewhere, right? It gets stored. So we would have another widget call for the button. And so here we would have sub btn, that will be tk button. And this is our object root. The display text will be submit. And the command that we're going to use is going to be a submit. That's for the built-in with that module. Okay. Now, some of the lower part, right? We wanted to line it up so it looks like rows and columns. So it's, you know, it's not going to be offset or, you know, weird looking. We wanted to make sure that it lines up as a grid. So here you can do rows and column number, right? So you have the label on the left. And then after that, right next to it is your entry to the right. And then below that, you would have the password label, and next to it is going to be the password entry. So you can set it so that way it looks straight, right? And then right below that is going to be our submit button. Okay. So when you run this, it looks like this. Okay. Now here, what we can say is, let's say my username is Casey and my password is password. And once I click submit, it shows up on my shell. Okay. So the grid part is to get it to be straight like this in a grid. Any question?
Is this kind of something like you're presenting this also as an option to do for any of the 3 projects?
Yeah. And you know, in future classes, you might need this type of information, right? Like, let's say that you need to make an app for an IoT device, and or, you know, not just the data analysis side, or in the sense where if you're writing a program for security, or you need to display a message to the user when after you ran that script, because at some point you wanted to show some kind of message, whether it's error or, you know, completed or accepted or whatever. You have to design the GUI for this. And, you know, just doing drag and drop things, like I tell my Java students, yeah, you can start with GUI first before you learn how to program, but it doesn't make any sense if you don't know what everything means. So it should be learned later on after you understand how class, object, and function work, so that way you can tie everything together, and that's the whole point. So I'm not requiring this for the project. It's a bonus point if you do it, because, you know, I want to give you the challenge, but down the line, you're going to find that this is useful in different areas. Okay. Any question? Okay, so this is a second example, so you can see how that's done. Okay. And I tell you here that you should look at the lab. So I decided not to make it an in-class assignment, as we already use the attendance for that grade. So that way you can, it can help lift up your lab grade, you know, or maintain your lab grade. So in our lab, let's talk about what we have to do. Okay. So the way that I wrote this was, it was designed to add in as pieces. Okay. Now, of course, we need to make sure that we install, download and install, right, the module. So pip install, right, Tkinter. Then what we want to do is we wanted to start with first import it in. Okay. So I'm going to open up my exercise. I'm going to walk you through the lines. And so if you have any questions, right? And I did take a screenshot of it at the end. So if you wanted to make sure like, oh, what did I miss? How come it's not running? This, I ran this and this is what the program should look like. So it started with the very basic. So the whole point is to show you how to make a little pop-up window that says hello friends, and then do some configuration with background and foreground. So foreground is the font color and the background is the background box color, and then size it and then make a button for click me. But remember, this button doesn't have any method. So even if you click it, it doesn't do anything, right? And then later on, we're going to tie in the other functions so you can see. And you can also look at the example that we just looked at. Okay. So I did do a screen capture from my code at the end so that way you know, but the whole point in this is it gives you the explanation, and as you go through it, you kind of see, oh, that's the piece that does this. So as you go through, you can add in, and every time that you, before you run that, each of the widget that you add, as long as you have the pack, the dot pack, it's gonna be able to build it for you, okay? So if you don't have it, you're not gonna see anything, or it might throw an error. However, so after each widget, if you wanted to, let's say that I wanted to add a button and to see if it shows up on what it looks like, then I can pack that and then be able to look at it first and then make adjustment to it. So that's one way that you can go back and forth and make adjustment on your script throughout the project. Okay. All right. So so here is exercise A. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit more, but you can also look at the. Okay. So here I import Tkinter as TK, and you can also use from Tkinter import asterisk. You can do it that way too. First, we are to create our object window, and that's going to be a new window. Then we're going to configure the window size. That's going to be 400 by 400, fairly small. In it, we're going to add a label, right? And sometime you would see that people would use title. So when that window pop up at the top, you know how it says TK, right? You can make it use title very much like HTML, where that pops up and you would see whatever title that you would give it. So for my window, I first wanted to show, it says hello friends. And then for my label event, for my widget, I just wanted to show hello friends. This is gonna be white and font and black in background, and it's gonna be 10 by 10. Once I'm done with that label, I can do the label.pack. Now, you can also do it right near the end where you say label.pack, button.pack, etc., .pack, right? And then you would do the main loop. You can do all of that all together, so it packs it. But if you want it to pack before the next one, you can also add it like the way I have it here. Then next, we're going to add a button widget. And here you notice that we're using like label with the capital L, button with the capital B, because this is built in. So we're pulling that from Tkinter. So you need to make sure that it's like that exact. Okay. And in it, for the display text for that button, on top of that button, it should say click me. And this is its size. Okay. And then we're also going to make it white and black. You can change it anything you want. So in the notes for the exercise, I had put down some of the color. You can use the HTML color chart, right? Like, you know, if you wanted like, I don't know, teal or ocean blue or different shades of blue, you can use the hex value that's used in HTML programming to change up the color and jazz up your application. So in a lot of these mobile games, you see the colors very vibrant. It's because when they designed the interface, they incorporated all of these into the events of, you know, of different events. And so that way you can see colorful components to their graphical user interface. Okay. So when you make widget, as I mentioned, you would use Tkinter predefined class, and they already have these classes made in that module. There's label, there's button, there's entry, there's text, and there's frame. Okay, so a label is to use to display text on the screen. So we usually would use the label inside that window canvas, so that way we can show what certain areas mean. Okay, the button simply is going to be displaying a button that contains some kind of text or image, so that way, and it's waiting to be clicked. Okay, and so when you have a text box, right, like I would do a check option 1 2 3 4, right, or a radio button to select, it is still a button because it's waiting to be clicked. Okay, so it's still a button event. For the entry, this is a field where it's going to listen for keyboard input. Like you would ask the user to enter a value, their name, etc. So that entry field is the widget that allows to have a single line text, get line in C++. Okay, for the text, this allows multi-line text entry. So if you make it where they would comment or put a review for your product, right? Let's say you make an app for, you know, whatever, and online purchases. Then if you wanted to make a section where they can review your products, then you would use text instead of entry, because entry gives you one line, text gives you multi-line. Then you have frame. This is going to be that rectangular region to group all the widgets together, or we would use it for padding widgets. Okay, so that kind of give you a little bit of the summary on these classes that's incorporated in the module. So I can make it where it would be blue and yellow, right? I can have it different shades of blue if I'm using different color code. So here, the common one you would see, you can use red, orange, yellow, so it understands that. Green. Okay, now if you want to use different shades of a specific color, it's best to use the color chart, the hexadecimal RGB values. Okay, and you can find that online. It's available in a lot of different websites like W3 Schools, tons of different websites that have the color wheel, and then you will pick it and it'll give you the hexadecimal value. Question?
Yeah, is the width and the height, do you have to hard code that, or is there any, can that be dynamic?
It is dynamic. The label is dynamic to how your text is for that label. you noticed earlier, so it's gonna try to size it to what it could, but most people they would configure it inside their script, because sometimes, right, it might not look good when it pops up. Earlier you saw it has like a little window, so when it's not configured, you know, it can be misleading because it's so tiny in the corner, people might miss it. So when you have a pop-up window, you want them to see, you want them to click, right? And so it's the same way that you see with, you know, some of the advertisement, right, or a notification, you want them to see. So if you don't size it, what happens is it's going to adjust it based on, you know, and your text, and what if it's a very short string that you have, so it's only going to size it to that small string. Okay.
I just
So
know
yeah.
I just know in JavaScript, the alert window, which is like the pop-up window here, is confined.
Yeah,
So,
and that's dependent on operating system too. And
so
JavaScript also, I'm sorry, it's also tied to browser. It's browser oriented. So, you know, and that could vary from one OS, one, you know, and how you use the browser, different version of the browsers. So this is why certain website they say supporting this and this and this and this.
so the window here, is that going to be confined as well, or does that?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So it's confined to the operating system design, because in the back you still have to use the OS to see all of this. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
So yeah, I recommend you have the configuration formatted. That way you don't have to worry about which is which, especially if you're running it across different platforms. Okay, and like between Mac OS, and so you kind of have to test it on how that would look on the Mac OS side, and the Linux side, and the Windows side, the Android side, and then kind of have a gauge and see, okay, I can adjust it to make it like this, where it would work better with mobile, where, you know, and also on the native, you know, desktop system. Okay. So, and then when you go through, you can create the buttons. Okay. So let me run this program so you can see. And so after I have my button is packed, you notice that I have the window.main loop. Why didn't I call it root.main loop like the other one? Well, because I made window as an object. So whatever object that you created, then you simply bring it down here and then you use main loop. So it infinitely listens for all the events that's needed in that program. Otherwise, because we originally have everything in console, so now you take it out of the console, you have to make sure that, so it's running a while loop in the back when they wrote this function. Okay, so here we go. So there I have hello friends and click me, right? And I didn't change it to the color. I had set you to change like blue and green and whatever, but you can play with it, and so that way you can see. But at this point, if I click nothing, because I don't have a function to do anything yet, right? So I can define a function, and then in it, I can say when it's clicked, just like the other one that you saw, right? It's, you know, you can have them click for points or whatever you like there. Okay, so if I need to make adjustment, I probably wanted to resize this a little bigger because it's cutting off the end of the two words there, the left and the right side. So we might wanted to change the width of that. Okay. So that kind of give you some practice with just adding label and button. Then we're going to move into the next part, part B. So what I did was, instead of doing step by step, I kind of pseudocoded out for you. Okay. And so when you look at the program, the script, you kind of see how that's laid out. So first we have to import the module. right? This counter variable, because this is a graphical user interface that we would count up every second until the user clicks stop. So let's say that you create an application with a timer, right? And let's say for running exercises for whatever, and you want to count up every seconds from the time that they start. So, and display that. So what you can do is you can create a counter variable, and that needs to be global. Then you're going to have an object. You can make it, you know, anything you want, window tk.tk. So once you have the object, then you're going to create a window and set it to a desired size, add label to it for the counting. Okay. And then you wanted to call the counting method to use the label as parameter. And we are going to create button to click to stop. So if once they click that button needs to be destroyed. So you have to have the destroy portion in there. And then we wanted to loop to listen to the event. So we should have a main loop there at the end. And that's it. So when you look at this program, all of that is there. Okay. Now you notice, just like JavaScript, right? And Java, 1000 means 1 second. Okay, that's in milliseconds. So here is the program. Let me close this. File open. This is part B. Okay, so as I ran through some of that, we have the counter variable. Here's the function for counting, right? And it's going to increment. And as we use global, we're going to say that, oh, that's a global variable. Okay. Then we have a label.config. Text is string counter because it's going to show 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but it's still going to be string to show as text. And then we are going to have, this is going to be for counting the seconds, and it's going to call on count. We have an object here. The title for this, it's going to be called counting seconds. Okay. On the label, we wanted to use green. And then we want to pack that label. Here we have a counter label, and we want to pass it as a label. With the button, when you create the button, you have to say what object is that for, what should it show on the button, what size it is, and we want it to destroy after they click it. And then we pack it. So as it packed, it's going to pass it to here. It's going to take it to that next step where it's going to say, okay, listen for these. And since we created root as an object, we use that with the main loop. So here we go. So you notice that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it keeps on going. It counts up. And then when I click stop, it goes away. Okay. Now there's some issues with this one, but it's basically, it says that it's going to be invalid after. So you can have it stop counting at a certain point. So there's more to improve in this program, of course, but it kind of shows you the very basic on how to do a count up or even a count down if you want to count down. Like, you know how they have like those countdown from the days that you would win something, or, you know, where you need to buy something. Any question? Okay, that's part B. Okay, so now what if I wanted to make a button with an image on it? right? Like I want to be fancy. Okay. So for Tkinter, even with the 3.9x support, right? Compatibility, it doesn't work with other type of image file like JPEG or PNG, just to let you know. Okay, it has to be GIF. Now I tried to work with JPEG yesterday, and then I had also researched it last night, and that's what it's documented on their website. They recommend that you work with GIF, that's best, but for JPEG, I think you have to implement additional component. So here is where we would implement GIF. Now it's important, just like HTML, JavaScript, and the other ones, you have to put it in the same directory, in the same folder where your script goes. So in order for this to work, you have to have a GIF image, and you're gonna save it, right, to the same folder as your script. When you declare your image file name, like for example, I can say logo is TK photo image. So that means that we're using an image from that module, the image with that module. Then your file, this needs to be the same exact name that you name your file. Otherwise, it does not work. Okay. Then what we want to do is to create a label that's going to contain that image. We would declare the variable that contains the explanation of that image. We have to have a label, otherwise they don't know what that is. Okay. Then we would create a label that passes the variable from step 5, and then loop to listen. So the breakdown of this gives you this. Okay. So the supported images GIF, PPM, and PGM formats is supported for the interface with Tkinter. And so here you have the object, okay? You have the logo, the image file information. The W1 here is going to be for your label, and you tie that back to the object, and you would say image is logo, which points to that file, and that's going to be on the right. So the adjustment of the position is like this. Explanation, whatever text that you put in there. The W2 here is going to give you the label, and then that's going to justify left. Okay. So when I run this, it looks like this. Okay. So whatever the explanation I put here for this image, it would say, so what you can see is the left is really just a label. The right is the label with the image. Any question?
Yes.
And yes.
Why is the pack method part of in the parentheses instead of outside, like we usually see the pack?
Oh, because you're packing it with other components. There's explanation that's gonna go with the W2. You're using it as a method of all of the other stuff, the label. And if I pack this outside, like like how we've been doing it, I would have tk.label.pack. So it's the same thing. It's just stored into a variable.
Okay.
Yeah. Questions? Okay, so here we have these. And this is how now you can do it. So I had stored my file as logo.gif, and it's in the same folder. Okay, it's right here. So if if you wanted to find it, if you don't have it stored in the same folder, you have to put in the path for it. Okay, like a file, directory, location. All right. Next, any other questions? We're going to talk about part D. Now we're going to do prompt messages. Okay. So in the message box is a widget that we can use. And when you use this message with the function name, you have to have these options. Otherwise, it's not going to like it. The title is going to be a string which is shown in the title, right? Like if I wanted to say error, I wanted to show that, or warning. And then the message itself in the message box. And then for the options, you can have it default or you can have it as parent. And in the default, it's used to specify the default button, like abort, retry, ignore. Some of these buttons is already defaulted, like built. Okay. With the parent, you can use to specify the window on the top, and then the message box is to be displayed. The way I did it is I did multiple, so I'm going to show you how that looks like in various times. Okay, so for show info, that's going to be just relevant if you want to just display some information to the user, right? Like how now when you have them enter their username and their password, if they enter it incorrectly, right, that will be a warning. Okay. But for the information itself, before they enter, you can have that prompt saying that your password needs to have this and this and this and this. So you can do show info that way. You can have warning if it's detecting something could possibly go wrong, or, if they click on something, let's say that, like you see this with a lot of download, right? When you download, it notifies you this can possibly contain malware. Do you want to scan? Yes or no? Okay. So that is actually can be used with warning and yes or no. Okay. You can have them to ask, you can ask question to the user. You can have them click OK to cancel. Okay, so all of these are already pre-made, pre-built for you. Okay, ask to retry, cancel. Okay, so in this one, let me pull up the file for you so you can see. So I have I said from Tkinter import asterisk. You can do it the other way. You can just import Tkinter as TK or whatever, right? And then we wanted to also import message box, which we will use throughout, right? So whatever name you give it here, you can use it with the method, the pre-built method that they had. Okay, so we have, here's our object, and then the geometry of it. Okay, so if you want it to be bigger, you can adjust this, right? We don't want it to be too small where they cannot see, so I would configure this. And then for the label, right, I want it for it to pop up first. It's going to say display message to user. Font is going to be this size, a little larger. Then we're going to pack that label. Then here we're going to bring down a message box. We're going to show the info. All it says is going to be information. So this one's going to pop up first. Then after that, it's going to show warning. then error, and so forth. And then at the end, we simply just have a main loop. Okay, so here we go. So it tells me, right, displaying message to the user. Okay, that's what we have here. And then once I click OK, it shows the next one, which is the warning. Okay. And whatever you put in the quotation here, it's going to show up right here. Okay, so if I wanted to put something more than just show warning, I can state that there. Click OK. It's going to show error. And as you see, right, you can hear the sound from my computer that it's making is that all of these are all chimed differently because they're categorized as different events. Okay. And then now, right, ask question, yes or no, right? If I click yes, and then it asks me, do you want to continue? Ask to cancel. Okay. Okay. Find a value, yes or no again. Okay, so you can do ask question or yes or no. Okay, if you wanted to prompt the user 2 options. Okay, and then on the last one, do I want to try again? And on this one, it tells me retry or cancel. Okay, so now you see how that's done. Question. Okay, no question. So I try to make it a little short and sweet so you can like practice it. So if you only wanted to do one, it's just a few lines so you can check it out. Okay, so try any of these, is okay. All right, the last one is question.
So you can only show, I guess with the exception of the show info box, you can only show one of those boxes at a time.
Right, because they are sequential. Interpreter goes line by line. So you can't have simultaneously. Because if you look at the way, like even in the case of a virus, right? Like you get those hoax virus that it keeps telling you that like you have like 1,000 different virus and malware in your computer, and you click OK and it just keep popping up. Okay. Yeah, it's just this. So now you see how it's done. Right? Because it just, they can have it loop for the same thing over and over and over and over again continuously, right? Or they can have different messages shown at different time.
Yeah, and there's no way to exit that.
Yeah, it's infinite loop. Okay, so you can just have it repeating like a while loop and done. So now you know it's easy to really fake something like that, to put together something like a hoax virus like that. Okay.
Okay.
Last one. So this one, I close this. Let's save this. So on the last one is your checkbox. Okay. And I was debating like, what should I give them that will be useful for their project or what they might be doing? But of course, there are tons of stuff online. You can take a look at the example. So once you write a few, you're gonna be like, oh, I know how to do this. This is easy, right? And then if you use the other toolkit, once you do a couple of the example, you're gonna be like, oh, okay, so this and this and this has to be done before you can, you know, tie all of the components together. So remember what I said earlier, we have a button that needs to be clicked. Well, check button also needs to be clicked, right? You can select multiple options or one. If you want them to select only one out of the three, then you have to make sure that you put that into the condition, because as it is, they can select all that's applied, right? So in the check button widget, which is standard to Tkinter, and basically it does on and off, right? If the user click it, it will be 1 as on, and if they leave it blank or unclick it, it's off. So the check buttons can also contain text or image. So you can have options like, let's say you can ask little kids on the game, like, which animals do you like the most? And you can show different animal and they can select it, right? So when the button is pressed, it would call the function. And here with the syntax is that you can have it where it would be that it would store into something. So check button is going to be master with options. So the master is to use to present to the parent window, and the options is going to be for the key that's going to be separated by the commas. And you're going to see how shortly. Okay. With the options, here are the options. You can have it with the active background, with the active foreground. So this will be presented with the background color or the foreground color. We can have it with the regular normal background. You can have it with bitmap is displayed with monochrome. You can present the size with the border, and then we can use command. That's what you've seen before. The command we use like submit and destroy. And then there's tons more like options, highlight, height, font. So there are a lot of different properties that we can implement for check buttons. Okay, on and off values. So here with the methods that we can tie in, these are your 5 given methods. We can deselect. So if once the user selected something, we can, if they uncheck that, it would deselect it, turns it from 1 to 0, off, on to off. Then we can have it flash. So it is flash when the active or well, between the active and the normal color. So we can have it change color. We can invoke. So this would be associated with specific method call for that check button. Like if I check it, then, you know, maybe it adds to that subtotal, right? Like let's say you have an option to donate $2 to Children's Hospital, and then it will just add the value to that. So it can invoke the method that you wrote. Then we would have select, where it turns on once that clicked, and then toggle. So we can, the method to use to toggle across different buttons. Okay. So in this program, a little longer than the other one because we had configured how it looks there. So we import Tkinter. We have an object. We configure the geometry of that object. Then we start with the label, right? Like the format that we've seen, right? So we have the object, what it should look like, right? So I wanted to show student options for courses, right? Like the type of courses, and that will be 50. Okay, so that to start the label so people know what they're supposed to pick, what they're picking for. And then I would pack that label. Then here I would use the int var because really it's gonna take that in as 0 and 1s. So I would have check button 1, 2, 3. So if you wanted 5 options, you would have check button 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. And then for each one, you would state its property. Okay, so button 1 is going to be a check button, and it ties back to the object. This is what it should look like. And its variable, because we need to store like 1 and 0 as they click or unclick. And then we would have the on value is 1, the off value is 0. How large that's going to be. So we have it by 2 by 10. And you want them to be consistent, right? Not one larger than the other. So keep the size the same. So on the first one, I have it as an online option for the student to click. The button 2, I have it as on-site, like a face-to-face class for the student to click. Same thing, right? As far as how it looks and how it would be selected. But the text display is different and the variable store is different. For the button 3, same thing, but I have it for hybrid. And this will be for our check button 3. And there you go. After I'm done, I will pack all 3 of them and then have the main loop. Okay. So now why don't we use W main loop here is because we didn't really create these. That would be part of the W. The W was for just the label and we packed that. Why isn't it not root? Well, we already tied a root into its property and into the parameter here, and itself is its own different objects. Okay, object 1, 2, and 3. So when we pack it, we simply just let it listen to all the 3 objects. So when we run this, so here is mine, and we can make it larger by adjusting the sizes. So I can do online, on-site, and hybrid, or I can do the other. Now, you notice that it's not really doing anything else once I selected it. So it's missing a portion where I need to really define a function that if I select hybrid, then it can print that I selected hybrid, or it would, add me into that class or something like that. Okay, so we don't have that function incorporated, but I just wanted to show you how you can make check buttons. So you
Where
can
would the, sorry, where would the function go?
So before you pack it, you can define it up here, okay? And then you just have to call it based on the functionality of each button. And they could be all different too. You can have 3 separate functions for 3 options. It depends on, how you're approaching that program. So if I'm saying that if it's just going to print out my selected options, then I can just write one function. So I can simply state that, right? Like right here, and then I can call it after each one. Or if I wanted to have it where it online, it's gonna, like, let's say that if it's a private school, they charge different costs for different type of classes, let's say, right? For an example, then we can have it add a different total when they do the checkout. Okay.
Wait, are you saying you don't have to use like an if-else statement? You could stick it somewhere?
Oh yeah. Well, if you use the if-else statement, then you have to tie it back to the object for the if-else, right? But we want to define a method because these are objects, and it's better to access method with objects and then you can also implement the if-else statement inside that function if you feel that there needs to be a condition for it. But it's already toggle back and forth. It already give you 1s and 0s. So if so you can even say that if they selected so you can say with the function for button 1, we can have it print the selection when the variable is that. So yes, you have to put the if else inside the function definition. Because when you have your on value is 1, then it would display online. Okay. Other questions? No questions, huh? Okay. So play with these, and what we will do is we will work on this. This is not due until Friday, so you have some time to play with it. But remember, at this point, if you guys are using online interpreter like REPL or online compiler, you have to save it as a file. It not automatically save it for you, but you gotta run it as a file, because online compiler is using console base only. You would not be able to see output. So just to let you know in case, right? But most of us are using idle or some form of IDE, so you should be all right. But if you are using online compiler or any kind of shell, you have to make sure that you write it, right, as a file, save it as a file, and run it as a file. And make sure that when you work with image, your file are together. Okay. All right.
Question.
Yeah.
So I was just looking at the bird project, and one of the birds has like 3 million records, and I tried to filter it, but the filter in the GBIF website doesn't affect the download. It still comes out to be the same amount of download. So
It's a lot of data. I know. She knows that too. I had explained to her that already. I'll let you choose if you feel like, because it's a lot, right? Like, what do you wanted to do with that? Do you want it to do less? I know that it's just a huge amount of data.
sorry, my internet is unstable.
So are you saying that you wanted to scope it down to something less? I think so, because that way our project, I don't, if you're getting garbage as data, then you are gonna have to analyze the garbage. So I told her it's a lot, but she just wanted something plotted. So if you and yeah, when you put in the parameter, I don't think that they have because with the database that they have, it's not filtering correctly either. And that's when I try with 5 bird species. It's just a lot of data. So what do you think? How do you want to approach it?
Well, there are birds with less data, so I would just have to choose the other bird.
Yeah. And I told her that, we're going to try to do our best with the species that she asked, but, that's why I narrow it down to like one compared to the other. So, because, from a perspective of just building a regular application and not implementing additional databases, it just doesn't make sense to pull all of that records for nothing, So, yeah, I would say pick birds that's less species. Less data for the species, and then, or what you can do is, if you're unable to get 2 of the species, just do 1. We can just study like how it impact their migration with temperature over time, and we can look at different period in time with that. Okay.
So I have to pull the temperature from Google because it's not in the database.
Right. So let's just pick, what I recommend is picking just pick a date, different date intervals. You can do it like January of, every year or something like that. I will see if I can find, because with the bio website, they might have something that would be you know, that would map out all the temperature over time. And then when you're looking at region, that could be specific to those birds too. So yeah, I'll try to see if I can find a list for you. And if we're looking at a certain region, like just North America or different part of geographical region.
Okay.
But it seems very interesting though, right? Like you can use it for, you know, analysis practice. It's a good one
Yes.
to do. Mhm. Other questions? Okay, well, that's all she got. So remember Wednesday, I don't have regular requirement for you to come and do the lab as you've seen what we need to do. Practice your GUI development and then have fun with it. You can jazz up your project. I can't wait to see them. And then if you have any questions, if you need to meet, yeah, you can let me know and then I'll jump on Zoom. I have a meeting exactly at 4 or a little bit before 4 for a program advisory where I talk to employers about what we should be developing and such, but I will be available before that. And then I won't be covering my Wednesday night class also. So because I will be in the meeting, but they're to the point where they're finishing this week as well. Okay. Questions? Okay, have a wonderful afternoon. If you think of something, let me know. As I promised earlier, let me see if I can find the link for the Cascade one. We just processed like 4 or 5 new students. So if you're interested, you can apply. Okay, I'll drop it into the chat now. Okay. And for Chris and Alma, I'll see you at 5. And for the rest of you, I will see you next Monday. And we'll talk about our project and stuff next Monday also. Okay, have a good afternoon, everyone. You can type in the chat your name if you like. And Alberto, you already applied to this. We have your application. I talked to Joe, so I don't know how or what happened, but they process it. So I will follow up on your situation. But I know you applied a while back. Okay. Yep. Okay. And Ray, I'll see you tomorrow.
Yep, see you tomorrow.
Okay. Oh, you're welcome. Have a good one, everyone. Any questions? We're good? All right. I'll sign off now. So take care. Echo. Bye.